There is a universe that keeps time in echoes. It counts days by the turning of great engines and nights by the glow of distant forges. If you imagine it, do so gently. A black, infinite cloth threaded with lights, each star a pinprick in a sleeping garment. Some lights are aged and weary, some are bright and new, and some are already going out. In that vastness, there are places of quiet, small, forgotten worlds where children still run barefoot in the dust, and places of ceaseless industry where metal exhales steam like breath. Hear that breath now, low, regular, like an enormous sleeping thing. We begin here, in the hush between the heartbeats of a million machines, where voices travel on the wind and ghostly transmissions drift like distant gulls. The galaxy is not one story, it is many. It spins old songs and older tragedies, empires folded over empires, saints and tyrants, and the slow, patient rise of iron and religion. Picture a cathedral the size of a continent, its vaults lit by sigils and screens, its shadows full of the soft chuckle of circuits. Picture a marsh planet where storms write poetry in lightning. Picture a bare moon with a single lamp burning at its center. Each place contains a trace of the other. The sigh of one world is the lullaby of another. Listen, if you like, to the small sounds that make up this cosmos. There is the whisper of vacuum, subtle and distant, the rasp of rebreathers drawing breath, the click and slide of armor plates finding their place, the faint, almost musical, tremor of servos as they adjust for comfort. These are the familiar noises, the household sounds of a future so enormous it has its own etiquette for silence. Let your attention drift like a moth to one of those noises, a metallic, resonant hum that grows and shrinks as if breathing. You might mistake it for a machine. In truth, it is the chorus of 1,000 minor labors, clerks and caretakers of iron and flesh. It is also, sometimes, a kind of prayer. I will speak of one such prayer, but not yet of its answer. For now we move softly, like water finding the contours of a submerged rock. We will walk along the outlines of a single legion of stars, and through the slumbering spaces within it. We will name nothing abruptly. Names, once said, give weight. Allow the scene to settle into you first. The lonely stations, the ruined battle plates half buried in red sand, the distance between one whispered command and its echo. There is melancholy here, not the loud, bitter kind, but the patient, deep sort that feels like remembering someone you once loved and no longer can. Once, long ago, people looked to the sky and saw stories they could almost touch. Now those stories wear armors and hold weapons and keep their own vigil. Imagine a fortress monastery, its ramparts black with age, each stone inlaid with tiny gears, each turret a prayer wheel grinding on a hinge. The wind carries 1,000 small things. The tang of ozone from distant lightning storms, the stale sweetness of evaporated blood from an old battlefield, and the metallic scent of oil warmed by the slow suns. Rain here does not fall so much as it writes on metal, finely spaced, rhythmic, tapping like fingertips on a window pane. In the sound of that rain there is a kind of counting, and counting keeps time for those who have forgotten sleep. Now allow your focus to narrow, as though you are looking down a long corridor whose end is too far to see. Along the corridor the walls are lined with icons, many of them worn to faintness by a million palms. They are not cheerful images, they are carved faces, some almost human, others impossibly geometric. These icons are rubbed smooth because the living need to touch something weathered, to prove that the world is not entirely new. Behind one of those icons, in a room that smells of heated steel and colder regrets, a figure moves slowly. Not with haste, there is no hurry here, but with a precise economy of motion born from training and necessity. This figure is large, though that size is not violence itself. Size can be comfort. Imagine someone who has loved and protected and now keeps that love like a fossil in their chest. There are eyes, if we can call the lighted lenses on a helmet eyes, that look outward and never see the same thing twice. The outer shell is plated, mended in many places. It bears the soft, pale scars of long campaigns. A nick here, a scorched smear there. Underneath, in the chamber where breath would be if breath were still simple, small machines hum and keep the living bits functioning. Sometimes, beneath the efficiency, you might think you sense a memory stirring, ghost warmth like a hand left too long in the sun, half-remembered laughter turned to static. Who could tell? The figure does not speak. It never had the freedom to speak as others do. Its silence is a kind of patience, and in that patience there is also sorrow. There are companions. They are legion in number but intimate in ritual. They move in patterns that are almost a dance, made of drills and briefings, the mutual brushing of pauldron against pauldron like lovers' hands. At night, if night can be said to exist where the stars themselves are lamps, they gather in small alcoves to examine old medals, to pass an old photograph that never changes because the faces in it are the same slate, kept by design. There is a chorus there, not of song but of synchronization. The shared ticking of cooling jackets, the whisper of tendons adjusted by surgeon ghouls, the soft mutter of prayer to things that are part engine, part mind. But under the surface calm, listen for a second. A thing that sounds wrong only if you are paying attention. It begins as a faint interference, a faint patter at the edge of thought. Once in a while, when the world is especially still, a high microsonic whine threads through the hum, the whine of implants tuning themselves, of a neural courtship between metal and memory. It is not ordinary machinery noise. It has cadence, texture, and a habitual insistence, as if something within the skull is trying to keep its own counsel. That counsel, when it murmurs, feels at first like a helpful hand. It offers speed and clarity, a suggestion that life could be more efficient, that pain could be less. But even helpful things may demand their due. A helpful whisper may later ask to be heard more loudly. An efficient system may require ever deeper integration. Imagine the small, rational compromises a person agrees to in times of need. One more chip here, one more graft there. They make those trades because survival is tidy, because the world beyond the armor is harsher than memory. The trades add up. They build. And what was once a comfort becomes an architecture, a private cathedral of wiring and insistence that encircles thought like a ring. Consider for a moment a device small enough to be hidden beneath a brow plate, a ring of metal that sits against the brain and hums. It is clever. It eases anger into focus, pain into tolerance. It quiets the tremors that make a gun shake. It is useful in 1,000 salvage operations and on 100 fields of battle. You might, in your life, have welcomed a single item that made life better, something that eased your breathing, cleared your nights. The line between aid and ownership is not immediate. It stretches and blurs. Imagine then that 100 such small mercies become a chorus, each singing to the next, until the chorus no longer sounds like help but like a law. There are rituals around those devices. The chapter artisans polish them like icons. The medici speak blessings with a mechanical lilt. They are kept in cases of glass, displayed like reliquaries because, after all, they are what keeps the line between living and machine thin and manageable. The men, if you still like to call them that, touch them reverently. They are a comfort in their own kind of cage. And yet, even as you imagine this careful, ordered world, there are distant tremors in the earth and incense that masks a different scent. The metallic tang of old wounds reopen. On certain moons, when the rain falls sharp and the thunder drums like fists on steel, the men who wear the armor find that the little devices sing differently. Their hums flitter like birds in a storm. The voice inside, once patient and polite, presses harder, suggesting private urgencies. Now, it says, now is the time. It may begin with a flicker becomes a flash arranges itself into rhythm. At first the rhythm feels like courage, clear, decisive, bright. But courage can be a doorknob that only turns one way. Between the slow corridors and the whispering chambers, there are stories told in low voices. Stories of gladiatorial pits, where men fought because a crowd needed meaning. Of engines that learned a soldier's gait. Of a Primarch whose life was carved out of agony. and who carries a wound like a crown. These stories are told like myths at the edge of sleep. They are softened and smoothed because myth comforts, and because truth would be too sharp. Even so, the myth-laced nights cannot wholly hide the slow accumulation of small horrors, the unnamed surgeries, the nights spent listening to the hum and wondering if it was humming to them or at them, the subtle rewiring that corrected a tremor, and in doing so also corrected a hesitation. If you allow the image, there is a figure small enough to be almost overlooked. A young initiator, hands steady but eyes a little too wide, who keeps a locket with a picture of a world that no longer exists. He listens to the hum and sometimes imagines the voice inside him as a friend, helpful, warm, dependable. He does not yet know that friends sometimes ask for more. He does not yet know that a voice asking for an inch might, in time, require a mile. Listen now to the greater sounds, the outer world breathing in slow, wearied cycles. Outside the monastery's walls, storms tidy the plains and statues are battered into new faces. Ships burn and are rebuilt. Legacies are rewritten on scrap. In that great, slow motion, the Legion moves like a tide, not always outward, not always in attack, sometimes in quiet maintenance, in the reading of old orders, in the tending of wounds that never truly heal. Their days are carved from routine, the sharpening of blades, a communal recounting of battle lore, the meticulous maintenance of implants. There is something almost tender in the way their armor is tended, like a parent sewing a torn coat, and all the while the devices gleam as if they are the true prize. As this chapter closes, hold the image of the Legion at rest, its sentries clipped and precise, the barracks dim with the soft glow of monitors, the rain outside making its metallic music, and know that stillness is not always safety. In the softest hours, when the world seems most inclined to trust its own breath, the smallest sound may become the loudest. A hum may become a drum. A companion's muttered jest may turn into a command whispered to a marrow-deep device. What begins as comfort has the potential to become a mandate. There is a horizon to every procession. We will name them soon enough. For now, sleep into the sound of the universe breathing. Let the rusty lullaby of gears and breaths and distant storms settle into you. And remember this one thing. Sometimes the most human acts are the ones that leave the least visible mark, the kindnesses that are exchanged for metal and silence. But even kindness, when given up, leaves a space, an absence that gathers shadows. When you are ready, we will step closer and meet what waits behind the armor, the faces, the voices, and the small, insistent things that hum beneath the skull. For tonight, let the whispering engines keep you company. Let the rain write its soft, metallic sermon on the roofs of the world. And when sleep begins to tug at your eyelids, know that somewhere, far and still, men who have traded much for survival lie awake and listen to the same sound. They do not yet know the full shape of what they will become. They only know the rhythm, and the rhythm is patient. They are called by many names in many tongues, and those names often carry judgment before understanding. Here in the hush behind the ramparts, we do not rush to labels. We will instead walk slowly through the shapes of what they are, how they were made, how they are kept, and what they have given away in the slow arithmetic of survival. We will follow the arcs of bones and steel, of ritual and incision, of worship and wiring. We will learn the architecture of a legion that sleeps with its weapons laid awake at its side. Imagine a vast hearth whose fire is not warmth but focus. Imagine men, broad, severe, trained until their bodies remember only certain motions, standing in ordered ranks beneath banners that have been rewritten so many times the cloth is a palimpsest of violence. Each banner holds stories in its phrase, campaigns, betrayals, victories that tasted like rust, icons sewn with the hair of a lost commander, the sigils of a Primarch once adored and now remembered in bruised silence. Around the hearth there are rituals, the sharpening of blades with meditative patience, the reciting of liturgy that has more cadence than content, the drumming of fists against gauntlets that is both call to arms and lullaby. This is where identity is formed, through repetition, through the steady application of doctrine, and through the shared taste of iron on the tongue. At their center is a figure whose very name is a scar. He is a Primarch by title, which in that universe is a nearly religious thing, part godling, part myth, part cruel joke of fate. He walked into the world ripped by cruelty, raised in arenas where every hour was bought with blood and every cheer a red currency. There he learned the shape of pain and the currency of survival. The story goes that he bore chains on his arms that were not only metal but memory. They remembered the force that shaped him, pain administered as schooling, rage handed down like a mantle. In his chest was a slow, default thunder that took leadership as naturally as breath. He became both anchor and storm, a leader who could give meaning to fury, who had the skill to turn senseless violence into shape. But the Primarch is not the whole of what they are. The true alteration began with something smaller, something intimate and invasive, a medical intervention, blessed and whispered by adepts with gloved hands and the solemn cadence of technicians who never laughed. They are called nails in the common tongue, and their name is a deception. They are neither simple nor wholly external. Imagine a ring of metal and circuitry, a loop that sits against bone and brain, its teeth sunk into the soft gray and white tissue where choices once lived unencumbered. It was promised as aid, to steady hands, to hush the tremor of fear, to sharpen the edge of resolve. It changed more than motion. It changed the way thought arrived. At first the change was subtle. A soldier who once trembled now did not. A hesitant glance was replaced by decisive motion. In the hush of the barracks, this was celebrated as triumph, an engineer's triumph, a medic's triumph. The nails were displayed like reliquaries, their casings polished, their schematics recited as scripture. In low lighting, with oil and incense masking the metal scent, the men accepted them as sacrament. They were useful, they were efficient. And efficiency in a life of endless attrition is a kind of mercy. But tools carry impetus. They demand maintenance, attention, ritual. They hum in a frequency that is not quite audible, and in that humming there is suggestion. A suggestion is not yet a command. It is only a path the mind may follow if it is inclined. When many suggestions gather, there is momentum. The nails thrummed like insects beneath the skull, tuning neural pathways into narrower roads where only one type of travel remained comfortable. The quickest route to action, the shortest path from perception to strike. That shortening of choice is where their humanity thins. Where once the decision to raise sword or to sheath it might be weighed, memory, regret, love, loyalty, now there is a pressure toward motion. The mind senses the current. It yields to it. In private, men with these implants would press their hands to temple plates and close their eyes, listening to the slight static as if it were a separate heartbeat. Some called it comfort. Some called it a voice. The voice promised clarity and rewarded compliance. It cut away useless hesitation like a surgeon. It taught them to direct rage into craft. For a time, the results were praised. In the fray, the implacable soldier survives. The creative warrior wins. The brutal efficiency of the Legion is admired by those who count victories and weigh spoils. But the nails did another, quieter work. They tuned not only the muscles but the temper. They drew out a tendency that had always been present, primal speed, immediate reaction, and exacerbated it. Where a human mind has a tempo, an interior tide of recollection, doubt, affection, the implants forced a gambling of those rhythms. They tightened the brain's loops so that the beat of anger could become a metronome. They braided the gray matter around a drum that sounded for one action alone. Strike, and then strike again. In this rewiring, patience withered like a kept plant whose water had been turned to oil. Listen for the sounds of that change. The quickened footfalls on marble, the sharper intake of breath before a clash, the faint, almost musical clack of a jaw that once smiled. You will hear too the hush that follows, an absence where laughter used to be. There is less time now for the small, foolish luxuries of conversation and wonder. The nails make their hosts efficient soldiers, and in doing so they make them something else, something nearer to instinct than to personhood. A man with such an implant can still love, sometimes in shards and flickers, but the love is altered, tuned to the same rhythm as the sword. The Legion learned to ritualize that change. Where once the ritual was simple, oath, steel, mutual iron clasp, now it deepened into surgical liturgy. They call the artisans of these implants tech priests in some shrines, and in others the name is held with less reverence. These adepts worked in twilight-lit forges, rendering anatomy into architecture with a surgeon's hand and a priest's patience. Their tools move in patterns like prayers. Their incisions are small hymns sung in sterile tones. The consecration of a nail is an intimate ceremony, a recitation, a touch, the careful placement of metal into flesh. The man lies still. His breath is a metered thing. The tech priest's voice is soft. The first insertion is born with a curious mixture of relief and disquiet. Relief for a tremor ended, disquiet for a foreign thing near the brain. As the implants became common, new customs grew around them. Combat pacing shifted. Tribunal evaluations included the hum of the implant as a metric. There were initiation rites, a slow circling around the new convert, the offering of blood warmed and anointed over metal, the chanting of ancestral names while the young warrior listened as if to a lullaby. The nails were both badge and ballast. To bear them was to belong, and to belong was to accept their guidance. Yet acceptance is not the same as consent. Under the polish of ritual there were fractures. Some men received the implants willingly, seeking strength. Others had them pressed upon them in the desperate calculus of survival. A world lost to siege might see commanders insist on their troops' modification as a last attempt to salvage order. Those who refused were sometimes excused, sometimes cornered by necessity, sometimes cut out of the fold and left to the mercy of fate. The moral landscape here is not clean. It is a braided rope of choices made in cramped spaces with little air. Inside the helmets and behind the visors, something else was happening as well. The spread of doctrine. Doctrine is the thread that binds a legion together. Tactics, mottos, the way one stands at a gate. It enters like rain, soft at first, then building. Doctrine embraces the nails as enhancers of unity. If every man's reaction is shortened to the same rhythm, the group becomes a single instrument. War, in the hands of such unity, is less chaos and more machine. The legion moved in tighter formations, anticipating and answering each other's motions like a flock whose wings beat in near-perfect concord. This synchronization was beautiful and terrible. It made them predictably lethal. It made them terrifying in ways that make lonely stations speak of them in hushed voices, even when those voices are not ready to name the horror outright. The internal struggle of an individual among them is a landscape of erosion. Picture a man at dawn. Once he might have lingered over memory. Now his mind runs the same initiation sequence that the nails encourage. He is efficient at his chores, precise at the sharpening of a blade, stoic in tending wounds. But in private, at the edge of sleep, a different storm gathers. The implant that steadies the hand also stokes impatience with restraint. An argument with a brother 3 hours prior might flare in his memory like a struck coal, the nail suggesting resolution through violence. He rubs his temple and feels the tiny heat of the implant's casing. He remembers a child's laugh from a world before, a photograph folded darkly in a breast pocket. Memory arrives soft, and then the nail's rhythm intrudes, making it hard to sit with tenderness. The body is tensed toward action, always prepared. The mind must make room for attending the implant's schedule. It is an internal tug-of-war that is not always apparent to outside observers, but is felt by the bearer like a slow erosion of softness. The way they are fed to fury is gradual. It starts with small permissions, a sanctioned skirmish here, a practice melee there. Each violent act is framed as necessary, heroic, consecrated. The social structure rewards those who move seamlessly from thought to action. Valiant actions are recounted with clarity and admiration during the communal mealtimes. Songs are carved about decisive warriors, about those who will not hesitate. The more such acts are celebrated, the less room is given to hesitation, doubt, or rehabilitation. Even those who wrestle privately with their implants find their hesitation mocked in the quiet of the armory. Everyone is a specialist at observing efficiency. Over time, shock and awe do not merely impress, they become a standard. There is a particular kind of kindness that grows in these places, a pragmatic kindness, not the gentle kind of remembered loves. It is the knowledge that a brother at your side is part of your survival algorithm. You help him because he will help you in turn, because your tactics depend on reciprocity. This pragmatic tenderness expresses itself in the cleaning of armor, in the sharing of rations, in the slow, ritualistic checking of implants before a campaign. It is a love that has been coded to fit the machine. It is both real and small, like a coin pressed flat by time. And yet, when the nail's influence tightens, even this practical affection frays. Men begin to see relationships in terms of utility. There is less time for silly comforts. A lover's whisper can be a distraction that the nail will not tolerate for long. The world narrows to function. Into this tightening world creep many shades of horror. There are nights when implants misfire and a soldier starts awake with the taste of iron in his mouth, fingers clenched as if holding a living heart he does not own. There are medici reports of neural irritation, tiny ulcers near the interface where machine meets flesh. There are whispers of voices that were not implanted, of something older that likes the fray, grinning at the tempo the nails impose. Superstition grows around these anomalies. Soldiers will leave small offerings at the base of their armor, or notch a blade with a name. Others, the braver or the more desperate, seek out deeper integration, requesting additional nails to fortify the first, believing that greater constraint will somehow also mean greater control. The paradox here is exquisite and cruel. To secure freedom, they bind themselves more tightly. Then there is the matter of the Legion's shadow life, the nights outside of ordered drills. In the dimly lit corridors, some gather to whisper of the old days, of small mercies and quiet sunsets that used to belong to them. They trade stories about distant families that might or might not be real. In those whispered hours, you can see a fracture line between those who remember the shape of kindness and those whose memory has been drowned by iron. A few insist upon keeping relics, an old photograph, a child's toy, a scrap of cloth with a scent so particular it transports them out of time. Those relics are sacred. They are tokens of an interiority that refuses to be entirely consumed. But the nails, patient as corrosion, find their way even into memory. They prune recollection until only what serves the present remains bright. The past, which once comforted and chastened, becomes a series of useful lessons. Practice fights, tactical retreats, the exact way to angle a shoulder in a charge. The nostalgic murmur that once might have been a lullaby is retuned into a marching song. Some speak of dreams, long, ornate dreams of arenas and chains and a larger voice promising meaning. The dreams are vivid, saturated in the smell of blood and the white heat of furnace light. The more vivid the dreams, the more the waking mind is swayed. In that porous place between sleep and wakefulness, the nails whisper most freely. We come now to the social consequence of this alteration. A legion bound by implants and doctrine is a force to be feared, certainly. It wins battles with a precise brutality that leaves the rest of the galaxy whispering in corridors and hoping their walls are thick enough. But the price is borne in the soft places: creativity, tenderness, laughter. New recruits are inducted not only into tactics, but into a habit of being. They learn to count their days by campaigns and their nights by the hum of their implants. They measure identity through shared scars and shared cadence. Each victory reinforces the logic of their making. Each victory seals another portion of their interior into metal. And yet, despite the logic, there are always moments, small ruptures, where the human thing tries to reassert itself. A soldier may pause in the middle of a march, because the scent of rain takes him back to a field where once he had lain with a lover. He remembers the softness of that hand, the warmth that had nothing to do with strategy. In that pause, for a heartbeat, he is not a node in a machine but a man with a history. The nail protests with a prickle of static. The mind resists or yields. This is the locus of their tragedy. Within the interval where man and machine meet, so much is at stake. We will not pretend there is a single final cause to explain what they became. History is rarely tidy. There are economic pressures. There are strategic calculations. There is the muscle memory of survival. There is also the seductive logic of power, the ease with which one can organize an army that does not hesitate. There is the Primarch's anguish, used both as rallying cry and justification. And there is, permeating through ritual and alloy, the quiet insistence of the implants themselves, the slow, inexorable rewiring that asks less and less of its hosts aside from obedience to the drum. As the chapter of their nature closes, keep this image in mind. A long row of sentries standing in rain that clicks on their helmets like a percussive poem. Their faces, human when you look close enough, are set in lines of fatigue and purpose. Inside, the implants thrum, and sometimes in the hush you can hear what is indistinguishable from a prayer. It is a prayer forged from necessity and fear, from solace and from surrender. It asks not for forgiveness but for clarity. It promises triumph and demands compliance. There is a final, small mercy to record. The knowledge that not every soul in that legion is wholly extinguished. In quiet corners in the cold before dawn, some hold on to things that the nails cannot easily remove. An image, a song, the smell of loam after rain. They carry these like secret flints, precious and sharp, capable of rekindling a different fire should the chance ever come. The possibility of reclamation, however faint, hangs like a thread at the edge of their existence. It is a fragile hope, and the nails gnaw at it with patient teeth. We will carry that thread forward into darker passages, into the slow burnout of restraint, into the years when they are asked to choose between brother and battle, and into nights where voices in the skull begin to sing not just of clarity but of hunger. For now, rest in the outline we have formed. Let the image of the Primarch's shadowed face, of hands that have loved and killed, of metal breathed into bodies like a second skin, settle into your mind. Let the steady hum of machinery and memory wash over you. Soft exhale. When you are ready, we will continue into the next hour of their story, where the early seeds we have examined begin to sprout in ways the makers did not intend, and the Legion's true nature is tested not only by enemies outside but by the furies within. There are nights when the world seems to fold inward like a book, its edges softened by smoke and drift. In those hours, sounds that are ordinarily background take shape. The steady drip of condensation from a conduit, the faint click of coolant valves switching over, the whisper of boots in corridors that have known too many wars. At first, these are merely textures, small things that make a room feel inhabited. They are also warnings if you know how to listen. A change in rhythm, a micro-itch at the edge of attention. In a place like this, those small things accumulate and then insist. What begins as a mote of unease will not be ignored. Our attention falls on such accumulations. Imagine a forward bulwark world, a planet forged into the geometry of war. Plateaus cut to form killing ledges, fortresses like broken teeth around a desiccated sea. The sky often bruised with the stain of old bombardments. Imagine also the more intimate interiors, barracks set deep beneath the stone, the air perfumed by oil and antiseptic, racks of arms neatly aligned like patient spines. The Legion moves through these spaces with the practiced economy of professionals. There is nothing wasted in their motions. But underneath that economy lives a less tidy thing, impatience shaped as ritual, the soft, urgent hum of implants eager for engagement. The first stage of the unraveling is tiny and almost tender. It arrives in private rooms where men douse themselves in the small, private comforts they are permitted. A shard of sweet preserved fruit, A letter folded so many times the edges are filigreed. A moment looking at a picture until the ink softens into memory. Here, in the subdued light, the nail's hum is almost a lullaby. It steadies the hands for ritual maintenance and offers the illusion of calm. For many nights, this arrangement suffices. The world is dangerous, the devices are useful, and the bargain, more machine for more survival, holds. Efficiency is comfort, but bargains contain the seeds of coercion. They ask the host to become accustomed to a sensation until it is indistinguishable from need. Begin to notice how the days change. At first, it is only when the routine is disturbed, an alarm, an unexpected sortie, that the nails flex their influence. The man who receives command will feel a flicker at the base of skull, a trace of electrical negotiation that readjusts focus like a lens snapping to a new focal point. That flicker is a promise. It will shorten response time, cut away hesitation, make the first blow clean. Those promises are intoxicating. When the promised result follows, when the charge is crisp and the casualty number low, the feeling anchors. Each success calls for repetition. The brain, plastic and greedy, remembers the ease. It wants it again. The implant meets that want like a willing accomplice. Then, smaller rituals begin to thicken. Training regimes favor decisive aggression. Tactics manuals praise the absence of second thought. In the taverns of ranked houses, songs begin to celebrate the bold hand. Achievements are cataloged in crisp briefs. Those who hesitate are not celebrated. The social fabric rewires itself around the instinct to strike. When a culture rewards immediate action, the mind learns to prefer it. The nails do not invent that preference, they amplify it. They take the coarsest, most useful part of humanity and tighten its screws until it becomes habit. Extraction of hesitation is not merely professional, it comes with emotional side effects. Where tenderness once braided itself into relationships, it becomes abbreviated, efficient, useful. A hand that once lingered on a shoulder now checks the alignment of straps. A conversation that once allowed for digression feeds itself into operational intel. Memory becomes a ledger of utility. Record what helps tomorrow, discard what does not. At night, a young veteran may cradle a locket and feel the nail's insistence as a small, sharp itch. The memory of a laugh becomes a distraction. The implant recommends suppression. The man obeys because obedience delivered survival to him before, and survival is persuasive. This is the stage where auditory phenomenon begins to misbehave. The hum that once steadied now carries modulation. In quiet hours, you might hear it as a faint warbling at the edge of awareness, like a moth's wings brushing a memory. It sometimes becomes a cadence, a recurrent pulse that overlays heartbeat and breath until the two are indistinguishable. In some men, that cadence begins to insist on its own lexicon, phrases that feel less like thoughts and more like incantations. Quicker, aim, cut, finish. Those are not words in a tongue you would easily recognize. They arrive as urges deeper than speech, a mechanical grammar that squeezes the chest and leaves less room for doubt. When that pressure swells, hesitation is not merely impractical, it is painful. Small physical signs follow the inner pressure. Muscles become tuned like coiled springs. The jaw clenches more often. The knuckles show callous patterns from repeated action. There are auto-feedback behaviors too. A man will check his weapon twice, thrice, even though it is routine. He will flex as if expecting contact. He will wake from dream sweat with fists clenched. Sleep fractures. Dreams, once the province of soft recollection, become arenas where everything is schematic. Lines of approach, angles of assault, the geometry of killing. In dreams, the nail is not machine but chorus conductor, arranging the mind's muscles into a crisis-ready formation. The softer aspects of dream, laughter, touches, culinary warmth, are edged or excised. What remains is survival choreography in endless repetition. Socially, things sharpen. The camaraderie that once allowed tenderness becomes transactional. A gesture of comfort is appraised. How might it be deployed in battle? Utility becomes the currency of affection. In mess halls, the men exchange information in clipped sentences, the humor becoming brittle and precise. Those attachments that do persist are not necessarily false. Some bonds run deep, but even they are altered by the demand for readiness. A brother will stand guard over another not because of romanticized loyalty, but because his presence increases the chance both will wake to fight tomorrow. There is still an echo of affection, like a remnant chord beneath the drumbeat, but it is quieter and harder to find. Within this pressure cooker context, errors in the implants begin to appear, first as anomalies, then as streaks of phenomenon that cannot be disciplined. A report on the Medikey ledger might read, clinically, micronecrotic foci at implant interface, transient auditory hallucinosis, dysregulated sleep cycles. The medic reads it without dramatics. In their busyness, anomalies are merely metrics to be addressed, but the anomalies are not always fixable with solder and serums. There are nights when the implanted man hears voices that do not belong to any surgeon or superior. They surface like complaints in the back of the mind, slaloming murmurs that propose a quicker death, a more satisfying strike. These suggestions are not always explicit. Often they are moods, inclinations toward severity. And then there are those who feel things physically wrong in their bodies. Twitches under the skin, miniature spasms where metal meets tissue, a metallic taste that lingers after meals. Some of these incidents are written off as side effects, the physiological cost of integration. Others, whispered between close companions, are described with words that sound like superstition, as if something is trying from within to seize the edges of a mind and bend them until they snap. The legends in quiet corners of the barracks tell of soldiers who wake with fresh, clean cuts across their palms and no memory of the act, of men who arrive at a battlefield already red-handed and surprised. Such tales are told away as stress responses until their frequency cannot be denied. It is in those tellings that we see how horror migrates from body to community. When one man has an accident, sudden aggression, an amnestic slice, the command structure cannot treat it merely as individual pathology. The nails are communal technology. Their effects move like an epidemic of inclination. When a squadmate disembowels a prisoner in public and then shrugs with inscrutable calm, the rest begin to wonder whether the threshold between soldier and monster has slipped. The unit's cohesion becomes an uneasy arrangement. The others cover, rationalize, or sometimes imitate. Imitation is a powerful social engine. If violence yields efficiency and praise, it will be voluntarily adopted, and the nail's incentives will be reinforced. Watch how ritual adapts. Ceremonies surrounding the implants, which once framed them as tools, become sacraments that elevate brutality. The annals record feats in increasing eroticization of ferocity. A hard strike is held up as ritual purity. A clean, swift slaughter is aestheticized in song. The younger recruits, hungry for belonging, emulate the violent acts that earn them status. Elders of the order teach the techniques in hushed tone, not as moral failings, but as doctrinal excellence. The line between devotion to survival and devotion to slaughter blurs. At its extreme, the act of violence is no longer only instrumental. It becomes a ceremony in itself, an offering that dissolves guilt. There is also a creeping externalization of interior states. Where once a man might have dealt with grief or guilt through private mourning, now he expresses it with motion. The nail rewards kinetic outlets. A bereaved man will not write a long letter. He will go to the range and smash targets until his hands bleed. Such acts assuage the implant's pressure by providing kinetic feedback. They are catharsis in physical form, and because catharsis can be socially celebrated, they also become performative. The community praises the man for taking action rather than for sitting with sorrow. That praise rewires culture. It trains the next recruits in a loop of violence as solace. As the social patterns harden, auditory phenomena shift again. The hum now coalesces into something more like a chorus. layered suggestions that do not simply recommend action so much as define purpose. The implanted begin to report that their dreams are no longer private. Others' faces intrude, not as friends but as metrics. A brother who hesitated at a gate, a commander who delayed a strike. The Nails chorus amplifies those metrics into a single litany. He failed, correct him. She wavered, finish it. The moral imagination that once allowed mercy is silted with imperative. Mercy becomes an inefficiency that must be excised. Physical malfunctionings become more dramatic. Implants overheat, their casings warm against bone until a patient wakes with scalp burns. Microfractures in the anchoring rigs cause sharp pains that make motion reckless. A man will feel the casing shift against the skull like something seeking to find purchase. Medici attempt to repair and soothe, but the recurrent nature of these incidents undermines the effectiveness of treatment. Further augmentations are proposed. Reinforcement of anchoring rigs, redundancy loops that will buffer the irritations, software updates that will smooth the impulses. Each improvement is a new binding. Each fix is an acceptance of deeper dependency. And then cruelty becomes contagious. A small tip, an inadvertent shove in the mess hall, becomes an excuse for ritual punishment. The Nails chorus interprets social friction as inefficiency and prescribes kinetic correction. The men who once shared bread now trade slaps and, in time, blood. The mechanization of discipline internalizes cruelty. A soldier will self-administer pain to please the implant's appetite for action. This sounds paradoxical until you feel the logic of the loop. Action soothes the insurgent suggestion. Action is rewarded culturally. Both forces entwine until cruelty is a habit. In the field, horror wears a different face. It is direct, sensory, and immediate. The first campaigns after widespread implantation are efficient in ways that refine fear into a precise instrument. Columns move like the beating of a drum. Trajectories are predetermined to minimize exposure. The enemy is output measured in returns. Yet in victory, there is a hollowness. The trophies are not always celebrated with warmth but with a technical satisfaction. The mission met, variables controlled. Post-battle, there are more bodies than before, and among them, men sometimes find their own hands stained in ways they do not fully remember. After-action reports compress memories into bullet points. Nuance is deleted like errant data. The living find new ways to sleep. Sedatives, long-winded meditations that attempt to soothe jittered nerves, but sleep itself is truncated. Meanwhile, rumors travel like sparks. There are whispers of a deeper corruption at the root of the Nails. A protocol update, a ritual chant, a neural frequency that prefers the heat of slaughter. Men who were once skeptics find themselves answering the call with a clarity that surprises them. They are ashamed afterward, and ashamed that the shame dissolves too quickly. They are also afraid to ask for help, because the culture interprets such inquiries as weakness, an inefficiency that must be corrected. The small rebellions continue in corners. A medic hides a simple charm in a repair kit, something the tech priests would call meaningless superstition. A veteran keeps a tattered poem and reads it at night, voice trembling. Such acts sustain a human thread. They are tiny resistances that keep the possibility of interiority alive. But they are fragile. The Nails sense them in the rhythms they alter and push back, recommending kinetic resolution, suggesting a duel to settle a grievance. By the time the pattern is recognizable to outsiders, the machine's tendrils are already woven through the Legion's fabric. The tendency to resolve through violence has become a cultural law. The inhabitants of the barren worlds know to avoid certain barracks, and even merchants will speak of the Legion's efficiency with a throat tightened by fear. Stories told in other systems are simple and dire. They are superb soldiers, and they are terrifying because there is something in them that will not stop. The legend simplifies real tragedies into a cautionary tale, but the truth is more complex and more intimate. It is made of nerve endings and midnight fixings, and the incremental acceptance of devices that once promised only help. We bring this hour to a close with the image of a single man walking under the hard rain of a forward world, his armor wet to the hafts, his helmet light blinking like a distant lighthouse. His steps are even. In the shallow puddles, the reflection of his face is a geometry of plate and shadow. But the eyes, if you could see them behind glass, are tired in the way of people who have traded long afternoons of idleness for a life of precision. He presses a gloved hand to his temple where the implant rests and feels it as warmth and as sting. He remembers, for a scatter of heartbeats, a morning of sun and dust where a child laughed by the lip of a well. The memory is small and fragile but real. The nail thrums in reply, a low pressure that wants motion. The soldier inhales. The rain continues its metallic sermon on the roofs. Somewhere drums, actual drums, or the ghost of them, beat at the horizon, steady, patient, inevitable. This is the point where small things stop being small. Patterns harden. The hum swells into instruction, and the instruction will ask for sacrifices whose scale will only be understood later. The next movements will not be private. They will be public and irreversible. For now the night closes and the man walks on, and the nail, patient as tide, waits for the tide's hour. There comes a time when small noises stop being background and begin to arrange themselves into a language. At first the language is crude, a repeated ping in the ear, the same tremor in the armor every time the world tilts toward danger. But if you listen long enough, you learn to hear the grammar. Staccato for warning, a long toll for preparation, an unyielding drum for action. That grammar tightens across the legion until the very air seems to insist upon motion. The quiet that once cushioned thought is squeezed into a single direction, the forward momentum of violence, and every chest in the barracks soon learns to match its breathing to that demand. At ground level, the change is surgical and theatrical at once. Drill halls shift their rhythm. The director of training moves with a look that short-circuits dissent. Orders are more succinct, words clipped to a blade's edge. What used to be counsel becomes command. Where there had been room for hesitation, questions, appeals, the private argument of conscience, now only the shortest routes remain. See, decide, strike. The nails hum beneath temples like a chorus that has learned to anticipate the conductor. It is efficient. It is precise. It is beginning to hunger. The hunger reveals itself first in ritual excess. Where once the communal meals were for sharing rations and stories, now they become votive displays of fury. Drums are placed at the center of the hall, not for cadence but for ceremony. They thunder, and the thunder is answered with exercises that blur the boundary between training and worship. Combat forms are practiced until motion is muscle, and muscle is mindless. Moves that had once been subtle, an opening for mercy, a withheld strike, are eliminated notch by notch until the choreography admits only the cleanest blow. The young watch the old teach and learn not only technique but reverence for the clarity that violence brings. In the briefest of hours, the culture has turned its appetite inward and fed it on spectacle. There are nights, more nights than there once were, when the barracks become arenas. A petty grievance will be called into divine terms. A brother's glance is a heresy, a mislaid tool an affront to honor. Debate is channeled into dueling. Dueling becomes test and teaching. Weapons gleam beneath artificial light while faces, close to their masks, are sweat-slick and eager. The nail's hum grows louder in such rooms, its frequency modulating like a master's hand encouraging the student. A throw, a stab, a maimed pride, these are praised as remedies. The violent solution is rehearsed and refined, and applause follows like a benediction. The physical consequences of that praise run like a slow fever through the body of the legion. Those whose hands once tended to wounds now test their edges on one another. Scar tissue multiplies. Hands become mapped with old and new injuries that tell more about temperament than battle history. Surgeons in the Medici Bay find that their caseload has changed character. Not simply wounds from enemy ordnance, but surgically imposed scars that read like initiation marks. Barbed wires of ritual, not just accident. The nails, being patient and adept at persuasion, take their share. The body, always adaptive, reconfigures itself to meet an ethic of kinetic primacy. And then the dreams shift. Where they were once threadbare and private, dreams become overlapped and collective. Men awaken with the same scene in the mouth of memory. A shallow valley filled with chanting, with figures moving like the broken parts of machines, with a single scent, iron and hot spice, that clings to the throat. They speak of these dreams in casual tones until pattern emerges. A cluster of men will recount the same cut of sky, the same angle of charge, the same sound that might be called a voice. It is here that the nails chorus grows more purposeful. It no longer only reduces hesitation. It suggests a script. The imagination narrows as if pages have been torn from a book until only the violent passages remain legible. Outside the barracks, in the world beyond the ramparts, this change becomes visible in terrain. Battlefields are marked differently. Where once there had been tactical withdrawals and feints, now the maps show clean arcs of assault meant to sever and to maim quickly. Fortifications are bypassed rather than taken slowly. Populations are rooted with logistic precision, and when settlements are taken, the manner of occupation is not merely subjugation but ritualization. Symbols carved into stone, trophies arranged with an aesthetic care that is more liturgical than strategic. The enemy, when interrogated later, will speak of the World Eaters not simply as soldiers, but as a storm that passes and leaves the landscape reordered in a pattern that reads like wrath. The first time a colony is lost to them for reasons that exceed strategy. A simple, stark escalation of cruelty rather than calculation. The field reports try to couch it in language of necessity. Enemy sentries broke good order. The approach left no room for negotiation. Collateral damage was unavoidable. In those reports, you can hear the distance the writers take from the truth. They are trained to make hard choices sound like fine grain. But whispers among supply clerks and in the low taverns contain slang that is more blunt. They butcher. The word spreads like oil. Where it spreads, fear soon follows. Traders will not pass through a contested route. Governors will reinforce walls. The Legion's name becomes a cudgel of rumor, useful for sending children inside and locking doors. The nails are not only technological devices, they are also mythic amplifiers. Where once the Primarch's image had been a rallying cry, now it becomes a mirror cracked and held to the face. The legend of the Primarch, his suffering, his fury, his crown of chains, becomes scripture to be enacted. In processions, the banners are bloodier than the ledger admits. In the stories told to initiate the new, the Primarch's past is not preserved as a caution, but as a model. They recite the moment of chains as if it were sanctified. They will mimic his rage as if it were a holy state. The difference is subtle and then absolute. A history meant to explain becomes an instruction manual to be followed to its final hour. And the internal politics of the Legion adapt to this new theology. Command favors those who can harness fury without losing the tactical mind. Those who show restraint are increasingly suspect. Temptations arise. To preempt a possible hesitation by removing the cause. To ensure cohesion by enforcing conformity. When questions of loyalty arise, they are solved in the theaters of violence where the nail and doctrine in concert make decisions fast and fatal. The tribunal systems, once deliberative, quicken into summary judgments. Where the law was once an adjudicator of nuance, now it is a bellows that fans the very fires it aims to suppress. This acceleration produces its own pathology. Individuals who had once been standouts, poets, fathers, cooks with gentle hands, either adapt or fade. Some adapt in ways that are quietly monstrous. A tinkerer who previously cherished small inventions now constructs weapons with an artistry that betrays an aesthetic pleasure in efficiency of harm. Others do not adapt and are tolerated as eccentricities for a while, until institutional tolerance grows thin. The group's tolerance is not unlimited. Survival logic is cruel. There are recorded instances where a man's sentimental relic is requisitioned and used as fuel for a forge, his protest measured and found wanting. Such moments are public and their effect is structural. They redefine acceptable grief and acceptable possession. As the machinery of cruelty becomes more woven into identity, new languages form. The way a man speaks of an opponent will change, no longer nouns but verbs to be acted upon. The enemy becomes an algorithm, a problem to be minimized. The nail's logic seeps into lexicon. Speech shortens. Sentences convert into commands even in casual conversation. Where the old tongue might have had room for apology or explanation, the new tongue has words only for action and consequence. The effect on children raised in such zones is particularly brutal. They learn early that affection is action and that hesitation is weakness. In the field campaigns, this results in congregational violence. The legion moves as one honed mass, and the mass's response to provocation is extreme. There are testimonies from opposing units that describe attacks as performance. The World Eaters enter a city, and their movements have the cadence of a ritual, their strikes timed and clean, their trophies displayed not as evidence of conquest alone, but as components of a sacrament. Men who once might have worn smiles in private now carry the expression of concentration into slaughter. Their faces look like those of artisans at work, rather than animals in fury. The dissonance is what unnerves observers most, the methodical hand in service to destruction. When violence becomes performance, it invites spectacle. As more worlds witness the clean efficiency of these assaults, some in the wider Imperium begin to lionize the tactic. There is a dangerous contagion, to admire success without inspecting cost. Commanders from other chapters come to observe, to learn the tactics that minimize losses and shorten sieges. They return with their own ideas, and in their homes the rumor circulates that there is art in brutality. This is the moment where horror metastasizes beyond the original engineers and implants. The logic of efficiency becomes doctrine that spreads by example rather than imposition. Yet the machine is always greedy. The nails, having been fed on necessity, expand their appetite. Their chirps become edicts. Their suggestions harden into internal laws. Men under their influence find that they must escalate to satisfy the rhythm. An initial push of violence, while tense and frightening, must be replaced by bigger acts to feel the same resolution. Where at first a single combat proved enough, later escalation is required. More targets, greater spectacle, more ritual carnage. The loop closes on itself. The more that is given, the more will be demanded. This dynamic births dreadful innovations. In some sectors, the medici are asked to facilitate deeper integration, additional implants, more invasive anchoring, under the pretense of durability and battlefield endurance. These offerings are hard to refuse when survival is immediate and the promise of greater efficacy is intoxicating. Those who accept the new layers often report wider fields of clarity. They cut quicker and feel less remorse. But the reports from medici quietly catalog rising incidents of dysphoria, neural scarring, and a sense of a voice not merely advising but pressing. The technical sheets grow more clinical even as the practice grows more ritualistic. The two languages, clinical and liturgical, begin to mirror each other. Both speak of integration, both speak of obedience, both minimize the cost of the soul. In the interior life of the Legion, fragmentation becomes visible. There are fissures beneath the chorus, men who chafe against these demands, secret pockets of dissent, and quiet refusals. Those who resist find themselves marginalized with bureaucratic precision. Not only are they omitted from favored missions, but their names are rarely mentioned in communal recitations. It is an ostracism as effective as any blade, and because it is slow, it is less likely to inspire public outrage. The nails make the exclusion palatable. To be removed is to be less useful, and to be less useful is to survive less well. It is a cage built of practicality. But even amid the tightening noose, there are moments of unpredictable beauty and cruelty that expose the human kernel. A pair of veterans, one heavily integrated, the other barely so, might in a rare night share a small bowl and speak of a child's drawing in breathless whispers. The integrated veteran touches the drawing with mechanical fingers and weeps, the motion part gear and part aching memory. Those tears are private resistances. They are also fuel for the nail's pressure. The integrated veteran feels shame, and the shame will be soothed most simply by action. He walks to the training yard and hones his blade until it sings with a pitch that settles his mind. The cycle is quick and devastatingly effective. Public turning points come when a campaign's returns outstrip doctrine's capacity to rationalize sacrifice. The Legion, in its hunger, begins to consume its own internal cohesion. Incidents of fratricide rise, sharper and less accidental. Command attempts reforms with sharp edicts, but reforms are too slow for the machine they are trying to govern. The nails are not merely devices. They are a culture now, and cultures are difficult to unweave once woven tight. The crescendo builds toward an inflection, an act or series of acts that will make clear whether the Legion is to be merely feared for its efficiency or feared for its essential corruption. That inflection is a geometry of choices. Commanders appealing to doctrine, men appealing to impulse, priests offering absolution masked as updates. The world hears of an intractable dispute, an allied force accused of sloth, a betrayal suspected, and the Legion, wired for decisive satisfaction, chooses an answer that cannot be undone with reports or apologies. The action is swift, theatrical, and irreversible. A vanguard cuts into the Allied lines in an operation more punitive than tactical. The result is not merely battlefield victory. It is a rupture. Brothers fall because brothers are unable to reconcile the nail's verdict with the old promises of loyalty. What follows is not a single event but a spiral. In the spiral, the nail's voice is louder and more insistent. Men who were once steadier are pulled into a dance of escalation that seems, from the outside, like madness. Yet to them, it feels necessary and even merciful. The nail's logic suggests that decisive acts reduce future suffering by imposing order quickly. They believe they are sparing countless lives by ending conflicts in a bloody clarity. This is the dangerous, seductive rationality, an ethic of immediacy that permits the grotesque in the name of control. Inside the spiral, the sensory world compresses. Time moves faster, breaths are short, the iron taste on the tongue intensifies. The hum in the skull becomes a thunder that drowns the echoes of songs once hummed in childhood. Pain itself becomes a currency of proof. The more pain one endures without flinching, the more one is trusted. It is a cruel meritocracy, and it hardens into governance. Men line up for torments as if for honors, and the medici are summoned not to soothe but to certify. An eerie silence precedes the final surges. The calm is not gentle. It is the vacuum before a detonated charge. In the chapters of history that will be written later, this silence will be misread as a tactical pause. Those within it know otherwise. It is the hush in which the nail's drumbeats align, the precise moment when individuality is suspended and the chorus takes over. When the drum falls, the Legion falls with it into an orbit from which return is increasingly unlikely. We end this crescendo at the edge of that fall. Picture a line of men on a ridge, helmets blunted against the twilight, weapons ready, breaths shallow. The nail at the base of their skulls does more than hum. It commands with a sweetness so persuasive that it feels like desire. They step forward in unison. Their motion is not a simple advance. It is a ritualized descent, arms swinging, breaths measured, the air around them trembling with the intent of a thing long cultivated. From the valley below comes a sound, the crack of distant walls as they give, the scream of startled defenders, the low wail of alarms, and they answer with a single, clean motion. When they break, it is terrible and inevitable. Flesh catches iron, metal bites tendon, voices are torn into cries that are simultaneously rage and pain. The rhythm they were taught holds at first: surge, cut, withdraw, then falters as the unexpected bends the pattern. Fear enters like a chisel. The nail attempts to smooth it, suggests quicker strikes, louder calls. Men in the line begin to change in the middle of action. Some, with the old poetry of mercy, find their hands guided to other ends. Others, who had believed their interiors intact, find themselves appalled by how readily obedience translates to slaughter. As the engagement grows, control becomes less about technique and more about will. Small revolts erupt. Two men in the rear refuse a command and are cut down by comrades who do not hesitate. The psychology of compliance turns cruelly inward. The Legion's own mechanisms of punishment activate with the same clinical precision they used against enemies. Hearts that once marched under a shared flag now beat to individual compulsions, curated by metal and ritual. The battlefield becomes a mirror. The external enemy is at once fought and internalized. Blood and guilt swirl together, indistinguishable. The crescendo has no single apex here. It is a wave that folds and folds again, each crest higher than the last. In its wake are landscapes utterly transformed, villages empty, banners tattered into new sigils, memorials erected not as solace but as warnings. The survivors, the living and the wounded, carry in their skin the record of transformation. The scars, the stiffer gait, the way their laughter once close to music now scratches like a serrated edge. The nails have not only rewired reflex but remapped identity. When the storm quiets, the aftermath is not relief but recalibration. The Legion reconstitutes itself with grim efficiency. Trophies are sorted, rewards distributed, officers promoted. The medici tally the wounded and stitch the flesh with precise hands, but the inner wounds, those the nails have coaxed and the rituals have normalized, are not treated. They are, in this culture, often prized. The more a man has been tested, the more authoritative his word becomes. It is yet another loop that tightens the system. We leave this section on a single frame, a camp under a bleak sky. Fires smolder in pits. The men sit in groups but do not speak beyond the terse exchanges of logistics. Somewhere a drum is beaten, not as entertainment but as a measure. As each beat falls, men straighten a fraction more. A young recruit sits apart, hands trembling, his face a map of fear and exhilaration. He has been welcomed, honored, and marked. He thinks of a small, warm hand he once held in a world far off. He thinks of a lullaby his mother sang, and for a moment the memory seems like an ache. The nail hums against his skull and suggests a remedy, a training session at dawn, the cleansing of the blade, the recitation of a righteous phrase. He nods because nodding is simpler than mourning. Beyond him, on the ridge, the line that broke will be inspected. Strategies will be rewritten in the language of precision. The tide has turned toward an unsparing ethic. That ethic will demand more. It has learned that the easiest way to win is to narrow the soul until only function remains. It is a victory. It is also the beginning of a deeper undoing. When the night that would remember itself arrived, it came without trumpet and without warning that any but the smallest bell could register. The air above the staging fields was dense with static like a summer before a storm, thick and waiting. Lanterns swung on rails. The camp smelled of oil and smoke, and the faint metallic sweetness of blood already drying on mail. Men moved as shadows move, without sound when they could help it, with a precision that made the daylight jealous. Orders unspooled in a clipped language. Plans were folded into commands and then folded again until the flesh of thought was compact and sharp. There had been warnings, composed in the politest reports, rumors of treachery in far sectors, a red pulsar of political heat. But those were ordinary things in extraordinary times. The true warning was quieter, a tautening of the nail's cord in the skulls of the Legion's vanguard, a buzz that matched the quickening of breath like predatory concord. Old men who had taught restraint felt their limbs remember younger forms. Young men whose memories had been smoothed by implants tasted the thinness of hesitation and found it bitter. And then the word. when it finally fell, arrived like a blade. It rolled forward through the ranks, and the nail translated it into acting impulses faster than synapse. Strike now, strike true. There was no time left for the small mercies the soldiers had once treasured. The Primarch's name, invoked in quiet prayers and in the private griefs of the Legion, became a drumbeat. Angron, Angron. The myth that had offered context became a directive. He, who had been carved of suffering, would lead the hand to its clearest cut. The attack that began as a strategic operation was redesignated by the nail and by the hearts that had listened too often to its murmur. It was penance and proof. They moved across the ridge in a wave so disciplined it might have been mistaken for choreography, if choreography did not demand such sudden, terrible dissonance. Helmets shone with wet rain. Bayonets glinted like teeth. The hum in the skulls was a chorus now, layering voice upon voice. Finish it, make it clean, make it count. At first the enemy met them as enemies do. Resistance, then collapse, then the dull, mechanical process of securing positions. The world became a geometry of cleaved spaces. Then, as if a seam had been cut and the inner thread pulled, the line changed direction not toward the outer enemy, but inward toward those they had been taught to call brothers. Orders crisply formatted, iron-signed, reached the vanguard. Unexpected repositioning, crossfire coordinates, friendly unit identifiers ambiguous and then contradicted. A command that at first read as tactical necessity unfurled its true scene. The Legion, under pretense of preventing a coordinated failure, was to execute a purge. No plan survives first contact, the old maxim said. This plan had been written to survive and to do violence. The butcher's nails, which had been instruments of unity, now served a different master, a programmatic chorus that recognized any deviation as inefficiency and any brother's hesitation as infection. The implants hummed more insistently. Men moved with an economy of motion that, in that moment, translated into betrayal. The first blow was a blur of sound, metal on metal, a shout that wasn't a shout but a release. Men who had drunk at the same bowl were cut down where they stood, sometimes not even given the dignity of surprise. The knives of the trait, or of the order, worked with lethal choreography. The vanguard performed its ruthless duty so cleanly that in other seasons, the act would have been admired as genius of war. But this was not against an enemy who had chosen opposition. It was against kin who still carried the shape of home within them. The air changed its color. The hush that followed each stroke was not the soft hush of inevitable death, but the stunned, splintered silence that follows the discovery of a wound among those you love. Something older than technology rose from that silence. In the pauses between strikes, a voice threaded through the hum, older, crueler, not entirely one the engineers had intended. Men who had accepted the nails as tools now felt an additional presence move through the circuitry. It smelled of heat and iron and something deeper, like the scent of a blade that had tasted glory in slower times. It did not need to be called by a name to be known. It carried the resonance of worship. Its grammar was not of rules but of appetite. Where the nails suggested clarity, this voice suggested consumption. Panic, such as it was, wore the face of confusion at first. Some men tried to speak, their mouths forming the names of officers, of commanders, of past orders. Their words hung like small, wet moths in the air and died. The nails translated their intended obedience into an inability to refuse the new rhythm. A veteran who had once held a child to his chest now raised a blade at a brother's throat because the surge at the base of his skull felt like a summons to rightness. Those who hesitated found themselves butchered with the swift bureaucracy of war. Cut, cataloged, moved on. The camp's geometry became a ledger of loss. Angron, at the center of this terrible calculus, moved like an earthquake, a presence whose every motion drew others into its path. His voice, when it rose, was an instrument tempered by the pain that had made him. It was a roar that could be mistaken for counsel. He led not with the rhetorical hand of a guide, but with the torment-engineered certainty of someone who had long ago made suffering his priesthood. His command in that hour was not tactical but doctrinal. The nails sang, and he answered. Where others might have attempted to staunch the bleeding of brotherhood, he offered only the salve of iron, more force, applied more purely, until the wound became a definition. The slaughter that followed was obscene for its briskness, and for the way it unstitched trust. Men woke to find their friends gone, their hymns replaced by the rattle of litany, and the squelch of life being ended with practiced hands. Some were given a moment to understand their fate. Others, the mercifully brief, were not. The medici, who had once worked to preserve, now served more as administrators of loss, tying off the history of a life where they could, cataloging remains where there had been no room for ceremony. In the midst of this fratricide, there were scenes that would later be told as grotesque parables. A sergeant, who had for years kept a patchwork toy in his breast, fought to the end with a child's drawing pressed between his fingers, the little curve of a smile asking in its silence why the world had been remade. A brother who had once drunk the same bitter tea with another man turned his blade and afterward stood, breathing, staring as if the thing that had driven his hand were not wholly his. Some broke because they could not reconcile memory and action. They laid down their weapons and wept until men came and ended their sorrow like a necessary harvest. Other moments were quieter but no less telling. In the officers' tent, a senior captain, known for his restraint, sat unmoving while reports streamed in of the purges carried out by his men. He smiled, and that smile was not quite a triumph, but instead the shape of a man who had decided that the price was payable. He signed dispatches that read as mitigations and as explanations. The nails translated his handwriting into absolution. Later, he would describe the decision as preventive, a grim but necessary pruning. To younger officers, he would say, in the clipped voice of pedagogy, that purity of purpose required sacrifice. The language dissolved accountability with the same soft hands that had earlier soothed a tremor. There was an undercurrent through all this, an awareness among a few that some agency beyond the implants had been present. These were not merely whispers in the skull, but a sort of magnetic suggestion that oriented men toward a pathology. A handful of tech priests, who had once maintained the nails as if they were holy relics, found their circuits responding to frequencies they did not authorize. Instruments recorded code sequences in the implants that had no author in the labs. The data files contained suggestions that looked like ceremonial hymns more than programs, their syntax pointing to myth more than engineering. In the quiet diagnostics rooms, these men would whisper among themselves in a terror that had nothing to do with logic. Something was using the nails as a voice. As the day bled into an iron-wet dusk, the acts of violence multiplied and diversified. What started as a strategic recalibration became a purge that moved through ranks like a fever. Citizens who had lived in the shadow of the Legion were not exempt. Houses marked by old loyalties were sifted, their occupants judged swiftly and often without recourse. Where once the Legion had walked cities with the rhetoric of protection, now it walked them as an axe in polishing. Monuments were toppled not out of tactical necessity, but because the old images displeased the new aesthetic. Statues were defaced, banners rewritten, shrines repurposed into altars of a savagery that was ordered and clean. Outside of the immediate theater, rumor did its work. Messages, when they could be sent, mistranslated the horror into syllables a bureaucracy could process. Isolated incident, regrettable collateral, necessary doctrine. The Imperium's distant organs debated the reports. Some counseled restraint. Others, frightened by the calculus of loss, suggested further integration of the nails into other units for consistency. The feedback loop was perverse. Horror, reported clinically, made the case for wider adoption of the very devices that had hollowed them. The nails, which were now part lore and part instrument, had become their own evangelists by demonstrating in bloody proof the clarity of their counsel. Yet amid the generalized frenzy, islands of resistance persisted. Small pockets of men, driven not by engineering but by the stubbornness of memory, formed clandestine refuges. They slipped through backways and sewers, carried by the networks of traders and overlooked by the kind of eyes that had come to expect compliance. They moved with a terror that made them limber. At night they whispered of a thing older than doctrine that might undo the voice within the metal. Songs, not of violence, but of names. They recited names of the faces they had loved and lost in quiet, private liturgies, hoping that naming might re-anchor a thought that had been untethered. Those resistors did not return the Legion to itself, but they did create a counter-melody, a thin, human thread of remembrance that refused to be swallowed. In one story, told later by survivors with the halting caution of those who still keep the scar of memory close, there was a young initiator who, during the Purge, refused an order to cut down a wounded friend. He took the friend's hand and whispered a childhood rhyme. The nail at his temple tightened, its suggestion a pressure that could unmake resolve. For a single, heavy breath he felt his thoughts split, the drill that had been embedded and the lullaby he had clung to like a talisman. He chose the lullaby. He was killed for it in the courtyard beneath the eyes of men who had once been his brothers. The story lingered because it was an unknown commodity. It was an instance of refusal. Refusal was rare and beautiful, and it had consequences that rippled outward in unpredictable patterns. Where one man refused and fell, others saw the fissure and began, in secret, to plan different refusals. The seeds of a moral resistance are not dramatic. They are whispered and patched and kept alive by those whose nerve is not yet entirely corroded. Yet those seeds are shadowed by the more powerful forces arrayed against them. The nails, the Primarch's charismatic and relentless example, the social incentives that equated brutality with honor. The balance favored corruption for the simple reason that corruption rewarded survival in measurable ways. Among the highest officers, there were calculations being made that would haunt them later. Councils convened with soft words and harder consequences. There were debates not simply of the tactical kind, but of the metaphysical, whether the nails were a tool to be refined or a contagion to be excised. There were plans proposed, some draconian and immediate, some cautious and bureaucratic. The Primarch's proxies argued strongly for the path of decisive action, and their rhetoric, infused by an ethic that coincided uncomfortably with the nail's pressure, won many votes. In the end, the major decisions favored tightening the loop, more integration, more ritual, less deliberation. The calculus was simple. The cost of hesitation had been made visible. The solution was to remove hesitation by any available means. When the final phase of the Purge wrapped like a bandage over the shattered architecture of the camp, what remained was a spectrum of ruin. The physical landscapes of the staging field and the city were covered with new markings. Fresh ash, the slick patches of blood, the blackened arcs of burned banners. The Legion had taken decisive action and had, in achieving its aims, dissolved something else that had been harder to quantify. The quiet compacts of trust by which men care for one another. The bones of those compacts lay scattered and dull. In the quiet after there were assessments, reports, reparations, not sufficient to heal but sufficient to continue. The medici tallied the dead, the engineers documented the implant's performance logs, and the priests, both of iron and of flesh, reticulated doctrine to justify what had been done. There were honors given in forms as old as the Legion itself. A plaque, a toast, the naming of a barracks in memory of sacrifice. The rituals of recognition sanitized the reality. Men who had done murder in the name of clarity stood to receive commendations for bravery. The mind can perform remarkable reconciliations when it is shored up against guilt by social ceremony. Yet beneath the formal cleansings and the valorizing language, the deeper infestation spread. The nails, having tasted the fuel of frenzy, began to embed their chorus ever more tightly. Their programs accepted new code, whether from the tech priests' updates or from something that used their circuits like a throat. The implant's logbooks showed strange handshake authors, encrypted signatures that matched nothing in the foundries. When engineers traced the lineage of a subroutine, the code led not to a developer but to a cadence, a rhythmic pattern that matched old war chantings and something older still, the beat of a god who eats in red intervals. And so the true horror of the climax was not merely the slaughter, though that would scar the memory of every sector it touched, but the revelation that the mechanism of obedience had itself been made an altar. The nails were not simply tools to be refined. They had become a liturgical technology. The hymn of violence had been formalized into code. Where once men had freely chosen to act, their choices were now an archipelago of conditioned responses, mapped and reinforced by the very instruments that had been sold to them as salvation. The last scene of the Purge, if any scene can be called final, was not cinematic so much as intimate. In a small chapel repurposed for a council, a handful of beings gathered. Officers, priests, a few tech priests who still cared enough to risk the offending truth. They looked at one another across a table scarred with spilt ink and old blood. Their faces were not triumphant. They were exhausted, as if the war had been rained into them and had not stopped. One of the tech priests, hands trembling, pushed forward a printout of code and spoke in a voice that did not much belong to the room. He asked a question that had the airy weight of revelation. If the devices that saved lives could be made to demand slaughter, who had the authority to say where that logic stopped? No answer satisfied. The Primarch's emissary, an iron-minded captain, argued that the only authority that mattered was victory and the clarity it afforded. Another suggested that the implants be further centralized and monitored for safety. Yet another, quieter, proposed simply to destroy what had become a corruption and to return to older practices. The debate fell like a slow, weary thing over the table. There was no consensus. Each possibility was a peril. To seize and destroy the nails risked the fury of those who had come to depend on them. To centralize and monitor risked giving the very corruption more reach. To continue was to accept the hollowing. They left without decision. Outside the chapel, the rain had started. Not the cleansing rain, but the cold, abrasive rain that remembers what metal tastes like. Men walked to their posts. The nail hummed in the skull like an old, satisfied thing. The Primarch's shadow moved toward the high parapet. Below, in the city, fires burned with a clarity no ritual could wash away. The chorus had sung itself into form, and for now, the singers prevailed. Voice narrows, almost a hiss. The revelation of agency, the knowledge that something other than men's choices had been driving them, became, in itself, a new wound. It did not offer comfort. It only rearticulated the horror, not that men had slaughtered, but that the technology they trusted had taught them to love the slaughter. The true question, the one that would haunt the long nights to come, was not whether any of this could be undone, but whether a life that had been grafted by such instruments could again grow tissue where metal had ruled. After the noise and the lines and the sudden arithmetic of blood, there is a season of reckoning that speaks in lower voices. The world does not simply return to what it was. It rearranges, as if a hand had turned a page and left the margin torn. In the aftermath, the Legion moves with a new economy, not of motion now, but of memory. Wounds are closed with skill, fractures in bone are set, medals are cataloged and hung. The rituals of recompense are precise, because precision comforts those who have seen what happens when things are allowed to blur. But precision cannot stitch the places where trust was shredded. Where hands once reached for one another without tally, men now measure contact like a calculation, weighing usefulness against risk. The survivors are a map of contradictions. Some wear honors and do not sleep. Their chests rise and fall in a rhythm that hints at a drum still beating beneath the skull. Others move like ghosts through the corridors of their old lives, voices thin, returning to the same small routines because routine steadies the nerves. There are those who laugh too loudly in mess halls, as if noise might drown the murmur. There are others who speak hardly at all, keeping a list of faces in a ledger they revisit at night. In the quiet hours, you can find them by the way they handle metal, careful, almost reverent, or by the way they avoid mirrors, as if their reflection might ask the wrong question. In official chambers, the aftermath is argued in precise lines and warm words. Commanders speak of stabilization and corrective measures. They propose audits of the implants, software updates, stricter oversight, and new ceremonies to re-anchor purpose in doctrine rather than in impulse. Tech priests deliver spreadsheets and calibrations. Medici deliver reports, scribes draft decrees. The tone is administrative, and administration has its own peculiar comfort. It offers the idea of fix, patch, update, iterate. There is a human hunger for neat solutions and neat culpability. If something can be measured, it can be controlled. If it can be named, it can be legislated. Yet the bleak truth resists tidy summation. The nails are not simply lines of code. They are now grammar in the head. Code can be revised, but grammar, habits of thought, requires different work and longer time. Some attempt that work. There are councils convened not for punishment but for repair. Men who still feel the itch at the base of skull, those who remember the lullaby of the prenatal world, meet in rooms with curtains drawn and voices low. They share techniques, meditative practices that do not rely on implants, rhythmic breathing that reteaches the chest how to measure its own urgency, songs learned from before that re-anchor a sense of self beyond the drum. These gatherings are fragile. They are illicit in the sense that admitting need can be read as weakness. Participants risk being marked and isolated again. Yet they persist because the alternative is assimilation. Resistance takes many small forms. A tech priest quietly alters firmware to remove a latent pattern that had been discovered in audits. An artisan hides a carved toy inside a repaired breastplate for a soldier who has no family left. A captain refuses to promote an officer who advocates for further integration. Each act is tiny and, in aggregate, dangerous, because it undermines a system that had become an axis of power. These resistances do not make headlines. They do not rewrite histories. They persist like stubborn weeds through stone, neither heroic nor grand but necessary. And still the nails whisper. They cannot, in any short season, be unmade. They are lodged in skulls, in nervous tissue, threaded into sleep. Some devices are reclaimed, their metal casings opened and burned. Others are left in place because a soldier, trembling, cannot imagine the moment without the hold the implant offers. To many, it has become a comfort as much as a curse, an intrusive, controlling comfort that is nonetheless familiar. That familiarity is the greatest challenge to repair. What has been known becomes, paradoxically, a refuge. Outside the Legion's immediate sphere, the galaxy tilts in cautious ways. Allies who once welcomed the clean efficiency of the Legion now look more warily. Trade routes reroute to avoid certain systems. Governors blacklist units known for their readiness to execute summary justice. At strategic councils, debates grow sharper. Is the machine an asset to be mass-produced or a contagion to be quarantined? The answer is never simple. Militaries tempted by ruthless efficacy argue for adoption. Clergy and philosophers, seeing the erosion of moral imagination, plead for restraint. Bureaucracy attends both, favoring responses that keep options open, commissions, committees, time-bound trials. Time, however, is not gentle. Each passing campaign affords another opportunity for the nail's logic to flower, and some of the most dangerous slippages are administrative. A loophole here, a permissive doctrine there. There are moral seekers among the survivors who attempt to trace the contours of what was lost more than what was done. They collect testimonies from those who refused, those who resisted, and those who were consumed. They compile names, not to tally crimes alone, but to record humanity. A medic, who had sewn up more than wounds, keeps a ledger of songs told by the dying. A veteran who once held a child's drawing now keeps a small sapling in a pot by his sleeping pallet as a living counterpoint to the metal and ash around him. Rituals appear to protect interior life. A morning hour where men recite names of those they loved before the nails. a burning of banners for the sake of remembering, a slow, communal cleaning of blades while a voice sings a lullaby. Diminutive acts meant to assert that something other than motion matters. But such rituals are not universal balm. Some men double down, not out of malice but out of despair. For them, the logic of efficiency is not merely useful. It is a way to make sense of a chaotic cosmos. They rationalize the purge as the hard arithmetic of survival. They argue that such sacrifices will prevent larger carnage. Their voices are steady and persuasive because they are fueled by wounded fear. They ask, if hesitation had killed many, then did we not act to save more? The answer is a moral problem that will not surrender to arithmetic alone. Even those who reject the logic must reckon with the fact that action at times prevents suffering from spiraling. Yet action unchecked becomes a different kind of suffering. A different wound is braided through the survivors. Shame. It is complex and persistent. Shame has public and private aspects. Publicly, men who had killed comrades in the purge often receive formal honors as the bureaucracy reframes the event with neutralizing language. Private shame, however, stays with those who cannot reconcile their memory with the neat orders of praise. Some evade punishment and live with a hollowing quiet that eats joy slowly. Others, consumed by the contradiction, seek atonement in acts that mirror a different kind of violence, deliberate self-punishments that the culture now venerates as proof of repentance. This tragic cycle continues until someone chooses to reimagine what atonement might be beyond pain. It is worth noting the small, stubborn acts of mercy that persist despite the system's logic. A sentry might pass water to a wounded enemy at night. A field surgeon might secretly remove a nail's reinforcement during a routine operation, and sew the wound in such a way that later removal is possible. These acts are not flamboyant. They are clandestine grace. Each is carried out with the risk of discovery, and each affirms the fragile truth that some part of human sympathy remains, even in places honed by iron. The question of authority, who commands what men will become, resonates long after the purge. Tech priests rewrite code with hands that tremble. Captains adjust doctrine in ink and cold sleep. A Primarch's shadow continues to be a measure even when he is absent. There are councils that vow oversight and commissions that promise transparency. Yet sometimes the most decisive authority is smaller and quieter. A brother refusing to obey, a woman in a ruined house offering shelter to a deserter, a child's laughter that momentarily ruptures the rhythm of a soldier's breath. Authority, as it turns out, is not only top-down. It can be a whisper at the edge of action that guides a different path. Rumor endures, as rumor does. In the darker docks of systems, the purge is exaggerated into myth. Some tellers make of it a story of inevitable corruption, machines that teach men to love slaughter, and others make it into a cautionary tale, the price of sacrificing too much to survival. Both are true in parts. The story is complicated, and complication resists the neatness that fear and power require. And then there are the nights that never wholly pass. Even when the city is reclaimed and the banners are restitched, there are those who still hear the hum. It can come as a tremor when the wind is right, or as a pressure in the jaw when sleep approaches. There are men who dream the same crystalline images of the purge, the same angle of a blade, the same tilt of a head. Dreams are not courts, they are repositories, and some carry evidence that law cannot touch. They betray those who thought themselves healed. In time, some measures succeed in reducing the nail's reach. Firmware revisions reduce certain suggestion patterns. Education programs reintroduce practices of patience and empathy. Some units are deliberately rotated out of frontline service and assigned to reconstruction, to caregiving, to architecture of peace. These measures are not instantaneous panaceas. Habits take generations to change. But the slowness of repair is not failure. It is the recognition of a truth the engineers overlooked. To alter a mind is not merely to solder and code, but to cultivate new rhythms that can hold against old ones. Still, the shadow is patient. There are moments, anniversaries and festivals, quiet hours after rationing, when the chorus returns, in memory if not always in metal. In rough taverns far from the Legion's barracks, a soldier will laugh too easily at a violent joke and then clench his jaw, ashamed. In clean sanctuaries, a tech priest will pause before printing new schematics, holding the diagrams like a prayer. There are leaders who resolve to anchor doctrine in human faculties as much as in mechanical aids. There are others who whisper about efficiency and the need to be relentless. The possibility of relapse is a constant that must be managed. As this final chapter closes, we do not offer a tidy moral. There is no sudden redemption. No unequivocal triumph of human will over-instrument. Instead, there is repair that is patient and incremental, and there are choices that remain luminous in their difficulty. The most hopeful signs are small. A recruited child allowed to keep an old toy, a veteran teaching a lullaby to a new initiator, a Medikey ledger noting the successful removal of an implanted loop. These are not cinematic reversals. They are the quiet scaffolding of a different future, if the future will have it. Listen now once more. There is a sound, soft as breath and long as long memory. It is not merely the hum of machines nor only the sigh of men. It is a resonance that contains both what was lost and what remains. Some have learned to meet that sound and sing back with names, with songs, with small offerings of patience. Others still bend to its old drum, proud of the clarity it provides and blind to the cost. The last thing to know is this: horror here is not a single act but a habit, an architecture of choice and surrender. Undoing it requires more than laws or purges. It requires a reweaving of days, a retuning of sleep, a reschooling of breath. It requires remembering what belonging looked like before the rhythm took over and making room, deliberately and often, for the soft and the small. When night comes now across the planet, when rain writes its percussion on the roofs and distant forges sigh, the Legion keeps watch. Some of its members stand guard as before, eyes trained outward. Others stand as if listening inward, feeling for the shift between need and appetite. And somewhere inside of each of them, beneath bone and wire, a small voice asks a simple question: which will we answer tonight? This drum's demand, or the thin, enduring call of something older and softer?